It's well known that Donald Trump loves a good deal, but his latest one is causing chaos and confusion just days after it was agreed. The US and Saudi Arabia announced on Wednesday that they had signed a nuclear power cooperation agreement. The text of the deal has not been released, but US media have reported that it will allow the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to enrich uranium and build nuclear reactors using American tech. Now, the reason that's a big issue is because enriching uranium is, as we've heard so often about Iran, a potential path to developing nuclear weapons. And Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has repeatedly said that he will pursue nuclear weapons if Iran, which he considers his biggest rival in the region, did. Here he is on Fox News back in 2023.
Are you concerned, though, Iran gets a nuclear weapon, about them getting a nuclear weapon?
Well, we are concerned of any country getting a nuclear weapon. That's a bad move, and you don't need to get a nuclear weapon because you cannot use it. Even if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, any country use a nuclear weapon, that means they are having a war with the rest of the world. The world cannot see another Hiroshima. If the world see 100,000 people dead, that means you are in a war with the rest of the world. So it's a useless effort to reach a nuclear weapon because you cannot use it. If you use it, you got to have a big fight with the rest of the world.
If they get one, will you?
If they get one, we have to get one.
So Trump has started a war he cannot win in Iran, potentially hastening Iran getting a nuclear weapon. And now he's actively supporting nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. So he's helping Iran get the nuke. Now he's going to help the Saudis get the nuke. It has, in parts of the US media, caused them to start asking difficult questions.
Why does Saudi Arabia get a civilian nuclear deal, but Iran doesn't get a civilian nuclear deal?
Well, again, this agreement is still being worked out. It will eventually, hopefully, be finalized with the condition that the president spoke about this morning. But this agreement in particular, as it's been discussed thus far, does give priority access for American companies in the Saudi nuclear energy program, which will ultimately benefit American industry workers and supply chains. So the deal that has been discussed thus far and will continue to be discussed absolutely puts America first, and that's obviously very important to this president.
So by the sounds of it, if Trump is going to promote nuclear proliferation in the Middle East, it will basically just be to make that bit more dollar for American firms. And the potential windfall could be pretty big. The deal, as it's been reported, would last for 30 years, could mean a lot of contracts for American firms to build nuclear reactors or nuclear enrichment sites in the Gulf. One country not best pleased, though, are the Israelis. The idea of a country other than Israel in the Middle East getting on a path to nuclear weapons is anathema to the Israeli political class. And the US-Saudi deal has already caused uproar inside Israel, with opposition politicians lining up to blame Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whose failed war on Iran has obviously led to this entire mess. The Americans, though, don't want to hang the Israelis out to dry. Of course they don't. Here's Carolyn Levitt again.
He wants to see these countries sign the Abraham Accord. It was one of the most historic accomplishments of his first term, and it continues to be a long-term goal of his to expand those accords to ultimately come to a place where the Middle East can be a peaceful and stable region. And yes, this deal with Saudi Arabia, the energy deal, is contingent on this condition as far as the president is concerned. So we'll continue to talk with our Saudi counterparts to get the deal finalized and hopefully see them joining the Abraham Accords very soon.
So that was Trump's press secretary saying that Saudi rights to enrich uranium will be contingent on joining the Abraham Accords. So if you recognize Israel, you can get a nuclear weapon. Apparently, though, that part of the deal was news to the Saudis, so it wasn't mentioned in the deal they signed.
Has the president talked to MBS since this new condition?
As you know, the president just put out this statement a few hours ago. I don't believe he's had a call with MBS in the hours since. However, this is something that he has raised in previous conversations and has also said many times in the past.
I know, like being Trump's spokesperson so often is saying, as you know, the president has just put out this statement, which means, as you know, the president just angrily put this out on Truth Social. So I've got no idea if he discussed this with the Saudis. I said that a deal they'd signed. I think probably the deal is still sort of under discussion. So Trump makes an agreement with the Saudis. Israel gets annoyed. And suddenly there's a new condition to this deal, which Trump adds unilaterally to the world on Truth Social to the deal. Now, normalization with Saudi Arabia has been a decades-long goal of Israel, but Riyadh has always said it will only formally recognize Israel when there is a path to Palestinian statehood. Now, obviously, there isn't one. And most analysts think a nuclear deal won't stop Mohammed bin Salman from insisting on that. Trump has also added another caveat, posting this on his Truth Social platform. The civil nuclear deal, there will be no enrichment of material being made between the United States and Saudi Arabia, which pertains only to non-military use, such as the ones that Iran and UAE already have, will be approved, but is totally subject to Saudi Arabia joining the very respected and successful Abraham Accords. The United States is not opposed to civil, non-enriched nuclear facilities. Thank you for your attention to this matter. I mean, it's very Trumpian in that the sequence of events doesn't really make any sense. So he goes to Saudi Arabia. All the reporting suggests he's come to an agreement with the Saudis whereby he is going to help the Saudis begin to enrich uranium. Now, enriching uranium is obviously very controversial because it can be a pathway to nuclear weapons, which is supposedly why the Americans started a war on the Iranians. However, then Israel are upset. So Trump says, oh, actually, they can only enrich uranium if they join the Abraham Accords. And then someone tells him, maybe this whole thing's crazy. And then he says, okay, no, they can't enrich the uranium. They can just have civilian nuclear power, which they already have anyway. Oh, and by the way, to have this now much less ambitious outcome, they have to sign up to the Abraham Accords, which they didn't want to sign. Like, if they're not going to sign the Abraham Accords to get civil nuclear infrastructure without enrichment, it doesn't make any sense to them. The one thing they don't really need is cheap energy.
Well, precisely. I think, like what the chaos of Trump's comms and all of that is just sort of surface stuff. I think what we're really seeing here is a reorienting geopolitics of the Middle East. As I always say, any global superpower, in this case the US, in the modern world, has got to have a grip on the region that is the Middle East. It has got to have a handle. It has to exert some kind of colonial influence because this is geopolitically very important, where it's located. It's at the interface of 3 major continents. It's essential for trade routes. It houses oil. It has really core resources. And so any global superpower has got to exert a significant, a colonial form of influence over this region. And for the past several decades, the main way that the US has done that is through Israel. The job of the Israeli lobby is not to convince the US that the Middle East needs to be colonized. The job of the Israeli lobby is to convince the US that Israel is the best way to do that. And I think what we're seeing over the past sort of 4 years happen is not so much that the US-Israeli pact has broken down. It's still strong. It's still here for the foreseeable future. But there's been a crack in it. And that crack is the fact that it's become somewhat of a political liability for politicians in the West to seem to be very close to Israel. Before you couldn't win an election unless you swore allegiance to Israel. And now across the right and the left, it's a relationship that actually has a lot more critical scrutiny. And also, there's been a kind of breakdown in message discipline. Like we've been seeing more and more figures in the Israeli government sort of chastising Donald Trump. He doesn't like that. We've been seeing a little crack in what was a very, very solid arrangement. And so what I think the US are doing is they're looking at the region and they're thinking, okay, we need some contingency here. We need to have another avenue through which we can have kind of proxy influence in this region. And they're looking understandably at the Gulf. The Gulf is a kind of perfect partner. It's their dynastic monarchies. You don't have to worry about political upheaval and all of that. You just establish good relationships with one of the few royal families, and then you have, this understanding that we are collaborators in the management of this region. And so, how can it kind of build that relationship? Well, one thing it doesn't have is it doesn't have economic leverage over the Gulf because the Gulf is financially independent. So it can't use aid and the IMF and loans and all these things to bring the Gulf into this relationship of bondage. So what does it have that the Gulf wants? The ability to invite these Gulf states onto the mainstream political stage to say we can now cultivate you not as this marginal political player that you have historically been, where, you know, people talk about your human rights abuses and women's rights and all of that. We can make you into a legitimate political player, a legitimate political power. And one of the key markers of that is having a nuclear weapon. Like, who has, I know that obviously they say that this is not going to be for a nuclear weapon, but as you say, it can't just be, the original agreement can't have been just for civil nuclear infrastructure. When you are a legitimate nuclear power, you are joining the ranks of like Russia and China and, you know, Britain and the US, like these very legitimate political powers. And that's the thing that the Gulf wants. And that's the thing the Gulf has been working towards. You know, there's this sort of 2030 strategy that it has had now for several years, where there was this idea of, we finished the first stage of state building, which was urbanization, financial independence, becoming really important gatekeepers in the flow of capital. The second phase of that is political and cultural legitimacy. And that's why Qatar hosts the World Cup. That's why, you know, Saudi Arabia develops this football league that has all these famous footballers in them. That's why, you know, there's a Guggenheim Museum in Abu Dhabi, why there's a Louvre in Abu Dhabi. This building of cultural and political legitimacy. And so there's this kind of symbiosis between those goals that the Gulf have and the need of the US to create a little bit of a contingency proxy plan for what to do in the region, how to maintain control of the region, now that the nature of allegiance with Israel has changed a little bit. So I think that's what we're seeing play out. We're actually seeing kind of a reconfiguring of not just the power balance in the region, but like the negotiation of the emergence of a new important political player on the global stage.
So Cristiano Ronaldo, a Guggenheim, and then a nuclear bomb.
That's how you
then
build a state.
The Gulf will have arrived.
Yeah, that's how you build a nation state, right? Cultural legitimacy, political power, financial and economic power.
A big old bomb.